files. Number 1, servant's heart. Will be the first one. Number 20. Number 20. Have thine own way. Number 20. Tom, would you pray tonight for the offering?
Dear Lord, thank you for the time that we spent together and getting your word together to learn about the things. We're thankful for the offering we're about to have and
Okay, one more. Let's sing number 29, Redeemed. Redeemed. Okay, thank you, Suzanne. All right. Tonight we'll be in Genesis 40 and 41. Genesis 40 and 41. Here, the account with Joseph here. Okay, in chapter 39, remember Joseph was serving very well in Potiphar's house, and he got noticed by Potiphar's wife, and she basically was after him daily, temptation, and he stood true and didn't get involved, and yet he was falsely accused. And he ends up being sent then to the Pharaoh's prison. And then it's sort of interesting. I was looking at commentaries. Potiphar was, it tells us in verse 1 of chapter 39, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, and whether he had anything to do with the prison too or not, that's a question. But anyways, maybe so, but being connected to Pharaoh, he has him put in Pharaoh's prison. At the end, let's say verse 22 of 39, I should just back up a little bit from 40. It says, and the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. And so you have this expression all along in Joseph's life that he's succeeding because the Lord is with him. And again, because he's a responsible person, because he's doing these things, God can really use and bless him. I mean, it's like God is, we'll see tonight, setting up these circumstances, but God is using him. God is doing this. Again, remember, it all started out, youngest son there, almost, he got one younger son, but he went out and he was obedient to his father, and but before that he had the dream. And so the thing that starts out was Joseph has been given this dream about what's going to happen to him. And he supposes he's going to be put in a position where his brothers are going to bow down to him, and then there was another dream where basically the whole family was going to bow down to him, including his father. And so we're brought now at this point. But you have to remember too, he's still a servant, even in these situations. I'm sure it's not where he would have loved to have been at all. And so anyway, we'll start in chapter 40. So here he is. He's in charge of the prison. Because of that, he's going to have occasion, as we'll read here in chapter 40, of actually running into and having a part in the lives of a couple of Pharaoh's servants who themselves were put in prison. So verse 1 says, "Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them, and they continued for some time in custody." So, again, you see the circumstances are going to be laid out here. This being set up. So what we're going to come to now, with his being over them and so in charge of those, he will notice what's going on in their lives, of course. So you got the situation. And the one thing about we're reading all this details and history and all that, and probably the key is there's often either a phrase or something that's being stated over, and we'll pick up on that in a minute when you go through these chapters to see what is being emphasized by God. We come to verse 5. It says that it comes to a night in which God is going to give them each a dream, okay? And again, this is going to, we have to think about this. In Joseph's situation, he's had the dream. Is he believing the dream? As he comes along, he's in this situation now. He's going to have some more dreams. By God giving him the ability to actually interpret the dream, it's going to be an encouragement to him that God really is with him in this situation. So it's going to show us, told us back in 39 that God was with him. He gets promoted in this position because God's blessing. He blessed him back in Potiphar's house. And here, we're not told exactly how God communicates to him. Whether he tells him the whole dream, if he tells him the interpretation, this is what happened and this is what it means. Does he have a dream himself? Does he have a vision? Does God speak to him? It doesn't tell us whether it's audible or not. But he definitely is being encouraged that God is with him for sure. So in verse 5, we see it being set up here by God. "And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. And so when Joseph came then in the morning, all right, he saw that they were troubled." They've had this dream. Must have been a stark thing in their dream. What does this dream mean? Okay, this is what is bothering them. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today? Why are you so sad? What's the problem?" And they said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And I want you to notice closely, I just told you about important lines. What does it say? What is Joseph's initial response? Well, how does he say it, though? I mean, what does he actually say in the text? Do not interpretations belong to God, right? Okay. He doesn't say, I've got this unique ability to interpret. And I want you to see that right away. This is what's brought out. Because he lets them know right away, don't these interpretations belong to God? And then he says, please tell me. So, what we have in the next two sections, we have basically, we'll have them both give their accounts here and what's going to take place. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me. Now this is the key thing here. He wants him to remember him. He says, I've given you the interpretation, and when he restores you, please tell Pharaoh about my situation. And also notice, he tells him it's going to take place in 3 days, and he says, I want you to remember me, and he even tells the 2 ways in which he's been unjustly treated. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house, for I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing but that they should put me in the pit, into the pit, okay? We know it's a prison. We sort of wonder what kind of a pit or what kind of a, dungeon, exactly what it was, but that's where he's at. And he says, I don't deserve to be here. So please, when you're restored in some way, let Pharaoh know my circumstances. Okay. So when the chief baker hears the dream was good, he is anxious to have his dream interpreted as well. That's what we read next. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream, and there were 3 cake baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are, again, 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Well, Joseph is put in a position where he has to give one good news, right? But in the other case, he turns around and he has to tell him the worst of news. So this is the circumstances all being laid out here. And the key is, when we come to the next section, is that the dreams take place just exactly as they were interpreted. Okay? On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. For the chief cupbearer, but yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So you basically in 40 we got this transition, how God is working out the circumstances for him to be known for his ability to interpret, okay, dreams. Dreams has been a key thing, okay. Most of the dreams in Genesis are to Joseph. Joseph is, or at least not to Joseph, but at least he interprets most of them here in Genesis. And so that's his ability, and God has made it known to him. Okay, so this all sets us up for what's going to take place then in chapter 41. And so here's what then takes place. Joseph, please remember me, right? Tell Pharaoh. What do we read in the very first verse of chapter 41? 2 years. Evidently, the cupbearer didn't remember to do. He's so excited about being back in his position and everything, but he forgets. I'm not sure what he thought about. Do I even talk to Pharaoh about the one who, and so on? but he just totally forgets, okay? He forgets about it. So here's Joseph. Do you think he had any hope at the time when this first took place in 40, that by his interpretation of the dreams, it might truly give him a way of getting out of prison? Yeah. Do you think he wanted to get out from under that trial a little bit quicker than it would take place? He spends 2 more years there, okay, in the prison, all right, not being remembered, okay? Now, I'm not sure if the cupbearer would have told Pharaoh at the time, if it would have went any place or not, you know, and that God's timing was perfect because of what, so you see God's in charge of this because God's going to bring a dream now to Pharaoh 2 years later, all right? And this has all been, and we would say, well, God, why didn't you just do this sooner? But we have to realize that whatever circumstance, again, we're in at the time, it's important that we just trust God. And that's what we see with Joseph. Joseph does. And we're going to read the similar things here in chapter 41 about his relationship to God and who he gives the credit to and how God works this all out for Joseph. But also there's bigger things going on here because he's not only concerned about Joseph, but he's concerned about the end result of all that's going on here. Okay. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. So now Pharaoh has a dream. And is Nile an important thing in Egypt? Yes. It's significant. I mean, now, how has the environmental and green movement today basically put in a situation where, God is sort of left out of the picture? Think about how many ways how that does that. You don't have, in the first place, God gets no credit for any of the blessings of the rain or anything like that in one place. But on the other hand, if God would bring judgment on our country by the weather, they're not going to recognize it, right? They've set that all up. I mean, that's basically unbelievers and leaving God out of the picture. They have no place for God. We are comforted about the environment and so on because God has promised us, as we've seen in Genesis, the seasons and so forth, and so on, and that God has promised that until the end, things are going to go on as normally and so on. So, I don't know about you, but I remember years where we had cold weather like this, okay? In fact, I've wondered where it went, in a sense. It's not that I really want it. And I've wondered where the snow has gone, because I remember when there was times when there was lots of snow, but it seems like things go in cycles and just the way things are. But you definitely have your seasons, don't you? Okay? You do know when winter's here, and you do know where fall is, and on all those kind of things. God is very much in charge. And in the situation here, Egypt is a dominant world power. Now, we don't have a Bible today telling us exactly what God is doing in all the powerful nations in the world. But I want you to realize that God is very much involved what he's doing for all those nations in the world. And where do you think the United States is in the middle of all this? Do you think we're sort of, as far as even right now, we talk about how important a nation is, and some of the key nations in the world, not only the nation of Israel, which he has his eyes on, but we are truly, you can just tell by the influence we have in the world, okay, what happens when we're not stable in our country and so on, right? So, yeah, God is doing things. We just don't have his word telling us exactly how the plan is until the end things. But here we have. And when we get through this, when we go through here, I want you to be thinking there's another person in the Bible also that was put into captivity who also had a similar kind of experience and was true to God. And you'll probably see some parallels as we go through this, and if you're thinking about it, because there's, anyway. So after these 2 years, Pharaoh has a dream. And this is the dream. In fact, he has 2 dreams. And the first one is by the Nile, which is crucial to their country, okay, their economy. There's 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed on the reed grass. And behold, then, after those 7 really healthy cows, then he saw in his dream, in this dream, it was really weird, you know, all of a sudden you had these thin cows come up and eat up the fat cows. Okay? This is his dream. This is the dream God gave him. You know, you got these cows by the Nile, you got the nice healthy ones, and so you're seeing this, and that's probably he's thinking, yeah, Egypt, prosperity, healthy cows, and then all of a sudden 7 more cows, and they're thin, and they consume the big, you know, the nice healthy cows. So that's his first dream. And he awakes out of it. What does that mean? He wakes up, and then he goes back to sleep. And then he dreamed a second time. Now there's another dream, right? And it tells us that when he fell asleep in verse 5, he dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the good ears, you know, the good, all right, the plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke again. Behold, it was a dream. And it says, behold, it was a dream. It must have been a pretty vivid dream that he had. And he remembers them both. Now, when you have a dream, do you remember the details of your dream? Normally? Do you sometimes get a little snitch of it a little bit, maybe, as you first wake up? Depends on how you wake up, but you might remember a little bit. Might not. But God has given him some vivid dreams here, enough for him to remember. And he remembers them both very clearly. And he's awoken by both of them. So then having this happen, verse 8 says, so in the morning his spirit was troubled. And he sent and he called all the magicians of Egypt and all his wise men. Okay, so he bring in the smartest people in Egypt. Okay, the wise men, the magicians. And Pharaoh told them his dream. Okay, his dreams. But there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. He even told him the details of his dream. And none of them could interpret the dream for him. Well, what's this about? Okay? So, someone becomes aware of Pharaoh's trouble and seeking the wise men and all that, and who is that? Who just is, the butler or the cupbearer, right? Yeah. And then, click, he forgot something. Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remembered my offenses today. I forgot. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me with the chief baker in the custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night. He and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. And a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When he told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. I'm sure being a cupbearer, he understood how concerned Pharaoh was. He wasn't getting any answers, and God had set this all up before by giving answers to his, you back up. The cupbearer didn't have to have a dream telling him when he was going to, that he was going to be okay, and and neither did the baker need to know that he was going to be hung in 3 days. He didn't need that, did he? So what's the point? Why did he give them dreams and want an interpretation? Because of Joseph, right? That's the whole reason this all happens. So again, it's setting Joseph up, again in the circumstances for him to be in this position. Verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit and had him shaved, you can say, cleaned up, give him a change of clothes so he can come and present himself to Pharaoh. He comes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Again, what is restated in 16? Again, what is Joseph's quick first response? So I'm going to read that. What's he say? You could. It's not me. It's not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. God will give it, not me. Okay? It's not me. He wants you to know that. He's a Hebrew, and his God. Now think about what we know later in Egypt and all the gods that the Egyptians have. And I'm sure God was not too happy about all these false gods in Egypt. And we know the battle that takes place in the Exodus. Basically, even the plagues are striking against the gods that the Egyptians all worshipped. And so there's a statement being made here that the God of the Hebrews, Joseph's God, and I don't know how much Pharaoh will understand that, but he understands that he's the one who has it. We'll see here in a minute. And the spirit of the gods, he will say, is in him. Because Pharaoh has this pluralistic concept of gods. And somehow, this Hebrew has connections. That's what we're going to see. So when it just tells us, Joseph answered Pharaoh, it's not me, but it's God. Then verse 17, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed on the reed grass. And 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin. And as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt, I mean, those are sick cows, okay? They had to be sick cows, really bad. And so then the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. What's that about, But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them. So it made no difference. It wasn't like these thin cows ate the fat cows and now they were fat, okay? For they were still as ugly as at the beginning. He said, then I awoke. Then next he says, I also then saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk. Full and good. 7 ears, then withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprouted after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. So, Joseph immediately gives him the answer. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good years are 7 years. The dreams are one. Okay? They're conveying basically the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh that he is about to do, again, what he's going to do. Let's see, I got verse 28. It was told Pharaoh, verse 29 over there. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. So that's going to be true. God's going to give Egypt bounty for 7 years. But after them, there will arise 7 years of famine. And all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, where it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that it is certainly fixed. And it's going to come about shortly, okay? But he tells him here. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are about to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. All right, so he tells him what it's going to be. So he tells him, now he tells him what's going to take place, but even tells him what he should do about it. Okay? Now, do you think he got what he should do about it from God? Do you think that was his own wisdom or God-given wisdom that he just had because God gave him wisdom in the first place, and he just, I'm just I'm just sort of rhetorical throwing that at you. What do you think? And then we see what Pharaoh, this proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And so, and Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this? I mean, he's already looked at all the magicians. He's had them all brought in, all the wise men, everybody in Egypt, basically. Is there anybody like this man? This, he's a Hebrew. He doesn't state that again, but that's what he is. In whom is the Spirit of God. So then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. Wow. Now, again, even in this situation, he's still got to serve. He's not totally free from being a servant in a sense, but boy, what a promotion as far as serving the king. I mean, he's you may almost say like the right-hand man. He's like next in command. He is given the responsibility for all their food in Egypt. What a responsibility to be put into, huh? And Joseph goes from, now think about that. He goes from what? He's one who's an obedient son who does what his father says. He is a favorite. He's been given the coat, right, of many colors. His brothers are jealous. They end up ready to kill him, but they don't go quite that far. The others speak up. He's thrown in the pit. Then Judah recommends they sell him off to, here come the Ishmaelites by. Why don't we just sell him a slave, make some money off him? We'll tell our father that he was killed, and they did the whole thing with putting blood on his garment and saying that. And Joseph was taken off. I'm sure at his age, at that point, it's a little terrifying to be sent off and what's going to happen to him. And he ends up in a really good place. He ends up being a servant, not in the field, remember, but he's a servant of Potiphar, right? And then he does the right things even there. He's blessed by God. God has blessed him with leadership and skills and responsibility. And he moves up, and it's like he's in this position and being blessed of God, and yet at the same time, temptation comes to him. He's tested, and he does the right thing, and yet he's falsely accused for doing what is right. Okay? Do you see any pictures of that of anybody else later that's really big down the line from Joseph? Yeah, as well. Someone who is charged falsely in, God's son, way down the line. There's some things there going on. Because why is Joseph really been put in this position? Why was he sent ahead like this to make sure this was done? Was it just to save Egypt? What does Egypt represent? A lot of times in the Bible. Captivity, the world, right? Those kind of things, all right? And we're going to see that what he does here, he's actually going to end up what? He's going to end up, famine comes, and if they were not prepared for the famine, how much starvation would there be? And what about his family? What about Israel?
Would it survive? Would Israel have survived? Because the famine wasn't just in Egypt, it was all over. Okay? So here's Joseph, unjustly treated to save the world. I mean, you know what I'm saying? In a sense, he's God's man. This is the type. Okay, I want you to see the type here that's being conveyed as well. God's put him in this position, uniquely to use him. And sure enough, he's wise enough, and he's put in this position, and he does what he's told. And so when it takes place, as we read on here, then Pharaoh also, we see some other indications about his relationship to God. Because we'll see what Pharaoh does here. He puts him in this position, he gives him all these things, and he made him ride in his second chariot, and they called out before him, bow the knee. You know, people are going to be bowing down to Joseph. What was his dream? Yes, people are going to bow down to you. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath-Paneah. And not exactly sure what the name means, but there's been some guesses. I would say. But the thing is, what do pagan, or you see the importance of names even? I mean, we've seen already in Genesis how Abram's name is changed to Abraham, and Sarai to Sarah, and Jacob is changed to Israel. And when you go into these countries the same way, when names are changed, it has significance. Okay? It has, and so he's given a name. I'm sure it meant something to the Egyptians, their culture, and he gave him and he also not only did that, but he gave him in marriage to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Potiphar, I should say, priest of On. So Joseph went out. He went out over the land of Egypt. Now, interesting how these things work out this way. He ends up marrying not a Hebrew, right? He's in a similar situation as Judah. Only Judah and Esau did it on purpose, okay? He's been put in this position. We could think of it in a practical sense. He's been given a name. He's been given a pagan wife, okay? So will he just assimilate? I was reading, I think it was Vadi Bakham's book too on Joseph, and he brings this up. When we think about how often is there a story about someone who ends up going someplace because they get really interested in money or business, like maybe they grew up in a Christian home and their son or their daughter goes off someplace and they get so caught up in business, and they basically pretty soon they're in a position where they forget God, they're not attending church, and everybody's really discouraged because basically they've been compromised in such a way that they've basically almost given up on God and so on. And the reason Vadi Bakum talks about that is that's a common thing that you hear about, and they said pray for, because we want to see this, person come to the Lord or whatever, or come back. Here's Joseph. He's been put in a place by himself in this pagan culture. Now he's been given an Egyptian name, been given an Egyptian wife, connected to a priest of their false religions, right? So is there any indication in the rest of this text that Joseph did not forsake God? Now, let's just go down a little bit. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly, and he gathered up all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and put the food in the cities.
He put in every city the food from the fields around it. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore them to him. And Joseph gave them names. Now, did he give them Egyptians' names, or did he give them Hebrew names? He gave them Hebrew names. Okay? And this is an indication that, he names these, okay, his own, okay? So he names one Manasseh and the other Ephraim. Manasseh means, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house, all the sorrow. God had blessed him with Manasseh, and it helped him, he says, to basically overcome all the grief that he had experienced. And he said the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful. Later we're going to see when Jacob talks about, he's going to talk about his fruitfulness, that Joseph is a fruitful one. It's interesting how that is, because here Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. God is blessed. He gives, again, you see this, that he, even though, and there's just, I don't want to say this, that, and we see this in the Old Testament, that even though it's never best to be put in a situation by yourself in a pagan culture and try to survive and thrive for God and so forth, it is possible if there is strong commitment to God. Okay? If you're put in a position like that and there's no other way, and that's just where you end up, there is a way for God to provide what's necessary even in that situation for you to truly live and please him and do what, and realize that you're even put in that position by God. Now, it goes on here, the 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come. As Joseph had said, there was famine in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. What he says to you, do. So when the famine had spread all over the land, Joseph opened up the storehouses, and so did the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt, to Joseph, to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. Now, we don't want to miss this, that it wasn't like, well, 7 years in, 8th year is still good, and 9th year is good, and the Pharaoh starts to think, no. It happens again, just exactly as God had said through Joseph, okay? Where do you think that put Joseph in the eyes of Pharaoh? I mean, it just affirmed the truth, right? And the truth in all the Egyptians, okay? So God is making a statement, even with Joseph, okay? And not only that, not only provides for Egypt, but because they have so much, the places around can come, and we're going to see it's going to be a situation that's going to lead to the next events coming up, because it's going to deliver Israel, which also, remember, Israel has to survive. Why would Jacob and Israel have to survive? And the family survive? Ultimately, we have to have this line, don't we? We have to have a Savior, right? Okay? So it's interesting in all those ways. Now, just one more thing before we're done is, I told you, does this remind you of anyone else in the Bible that was put in a similar situation? A world leader, a person taken as a captive into captivity. World leader has dream. Daniel, there we go, Daniel, yeah. Daniel, think about that. Later, it's going to happen again. And in that case, even a more difficult situation, because what do we know that's different? Pharaoh
What did he do for the magicians when he wanted the interpretation? He told them what? I mean, Pharaoh. Pharaoh. What did Pharaoh? This Pharaoh here. This Pharaoh here. What did he? He gave the details. He told him the dream. Think about Daniel. Remember what happened in Daniel? Did Nebuchadnezzar give him the details of the dream? He didn't. He didn't. He didn't. Right? He didn't. And it didn't matter because God could give the details to Daniel and the interpretation. And so that Nebuchadnezzar would know when he told him the dream and the interpretation of the dream that indeed this comes from God. So here you have God very much involved in these very powerful nations. And he had his people planted there. You think about Egypt, and you think about then with Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, incredible. Do you know the reason? I mean, I want to say this too. When you study the Old Testament, there was that first captivity when they did take like Daniel and the people out of, and many of those that came out were godly people that were taken first. Do you know why they were taken out first before the destruction of Jerusalem? For that very reason, right? That they would not have to suffer the destruction. So in a sense, God pulled out godly people that they didn't have to necessarily go through what took place there. Not everyone, because we know Jeremiah was there, but there was a case where many of them were pulled out and delivered because of that. So even though they weren't in their homeland, they were delivered by God. So, any applications here? Again, we can be faithful in any situation, and God can provide for whatever we need. And if we are faithful in the little along the way, and we'll be in a position where God can use us. I think that's key. Because Joseph didn't become bitter. He didn't become despondent. He didn't give up in any of these places along the way. He kept doing what he should do and did it well, and because of that, he was in a position where he could be, in a sense, promoted and used by God in very unique situations. So, yeah. And he himself delivered and his family and so on. Okay. All right. Any comments? All right. God really has everything under control. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this people. Thank you that you care about us. Again, that there's no surprises for you. Yeah, you're not only sovereign over the nations, but you're very much involved in the lives of each of the believers here, each of us, Lord. Lord, we're grateful. We want to be in a position where we can be used of you, and Lord, be in a position where we can have an effective testimony as well, a testimony where we truly are quick to point people to you and give you the glory like Joseph did. In the name of pray. Amen. Okay.